Good morning. A hectic morning, but a good one nonetheless. Not internet per se, but some technical. Very untimely, as they all usually are. The worst possible time. I was already rushed. And that didn't help matters. I have the papers for next lesson printed out. I just haven't stapled them yet, so after we're done here this morning, I'll staple them and get them out on the table. It's the last Sunday for our video series, so tonight we'll watch our last video lesson, and then starting next Sunday we'll be continuing our study on Sunday nights. So I would encourage you all to come and take part in that tonight on perseverance, which we all need. This morning we're looking at lesson 55. Wednesday night we looked at the Transfiguration, a very unique and amazing moment in Jesus' ministry and life. And today we'll look at the events that happened right after that, right following that major event of the Transfiguration. As they descended that mountain, Jesus, Peter, James, and John came down the mountain, had a little conversation, and it's ironic that the picture they see when they get down the mountain, the contrast from what they had just experienced is so stark, and it's very, probably by design of the Holy Spirit, very much similar to Moses on the mountain when he came down and what he saw compared to what he had been. He's talking with God on the mountain, getting the law, and he goes down there and he sees something that just is a total on the other end of the spectrum. This grand and glorious event, and then right back down to the lowest of lows. And this wasn't quite the lowest of lows, but it was a low point, or at least a buzzkill, as it might be called, compared to what Jesus and the others, compared to what Peter, James, and John had just witnessed up there. Let's turn to Romans chapter 1 as we begin here. Romans 1, 16 and 17, or if you don't want to turn there, I'll just read that. It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith," or faith for faith, or faith unto faith. From faith unto faith, or from faith to faith. As it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. It's a very interesting phrase, from faith to faith. In the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith unto faith. Begins with faith, it ends with faith. Or it begins with one kind of faith and it ends with another, a bigger, greater, more mature kind of faith. The Bible has a lot to say about faith. Hebrews 11:6, without faith it is impossible to please God. That alone makes it extremely important. I think you would agree. By grace we are saved through faith. Ephesians 2:8. We walk the Christian walk by faith, not by sight. Faith is the shield that protects us from the devil, Ephesians 6:16. Faith is the victory that's overcome the world, 1 John 5:4. And the ultimate outcome of faith will be the salvation of our souls, 1 Peter 1:9. So here's a question for us to ask ourselves. an answer to ourselves. Is your faith strong? And is it where it needs to be? Or is your faith where it needs to be all the time? I think that's an easy one to answer. For me anyway, probably for you too. No, it's not. Maybe not even half the time. But that's going to play a big role in our lesson, the text here this morning, which is Matthew 17 still, as well as Mark 9. We'll look at Mark's account, use it primarily. Matthew 17 and Luke 9. Even though our faith is not where it should be all the time, and we struggle, there's still hope. We can still be encouraged, and hopefully we will be as a result of reading about a time when the apostles' faith was struggling even, and some other people's as well. So Jesus came down the mountain only to find the people he had been training all this time were still lacking in that very important point of faith. So, Mark chapter 9, verses 14 through 29, this is what the text says. And when they came to the disciples, this is coming down the mountain, when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and scribes arguing with them. There's the picture that they see as they come down the mountain. Moses came down and saw the Israelites worshiping a golden calf. Jesus and Peter and James and John come down and they see a crowd of people and these scribes that had come, and you can just picture it. You can just see it just by the description there. Scribes arguing with the disciples of Jesus, and a crowd gathered around them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" And someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And they brought the boy to him, and when the spirits saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has this been happening to him?" And he said, "From childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible for one who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe. Help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." Okay, by now in our study of the life of Christ, this scene is pretty familiar, isn't it? The setting here, it may even feel like we've already been here. We've already studied this because of different occurrences of this kind of thing. So it's nothing new, and yet there is some newness to it. The conversation is different. There are some new things in here as well, as far as things we've never seen happen before, like the disciples not being able to cast out this demon, this spirit, unclean spirit. Unclean spirit is the same thing as a demon. Evil spirit, unclean spirit, demon. I think those are the three Bible words or descriptions of this thing. It's all the same. We see something that Jesus says that maybe is not what happens every time, so we can learn from that. Crowd runs up to Jesus, and they're amazed. Why were they amazed? Well, because it was Jesus, I guess. All he was doing was walking down the mountain. He wasn't still glowing, like shining like he was up on top of the mountain. But they were there clearly to see Jesus, but all they got so far was Jesus, his posse or his group. Now Jesus is here. But what Jesus was concerned about, it seems, was the arguing. Not arguing in general, but this particular circumstance because of who was there, the scribes, and he wanted to know what this was all about. But instead of getting the answer exactly as he asked, I guess they were arguing about this man and the situation revolving around this man, which was this. He brought his son, who had a spirit, a demon, that was possessing him off and on, like we've seen in other cases. Pretty extreme case this one was. It would seize him. If you remember the demon that we looked at a few weeks or a couple months maybe even ago, the one that was the legion of demons, and this man was so strong when it came upon him that he broke the chains and he ran out into the caves and he beat up people and all this. We noticed and pointed out that he wasn't always like that. It would come and go. It would come in fits, is what a lot of people would see it as. He has these fits, which implies that sometimes he was fine, totally himself. But then here it comes, something happens, and people didn't really understand it probably, but at this time they did understand this situation, or they came to understand, or to expect it maybe, or to recognize it. It was a demon, an unclean spirit. And we're not talking, this ancient superstition that when people had mental illnesses, they thought it was, spirits that were taking over them. We should not confuse the two. Two very different things. Sometimes the symptoms looked the same, similar, as this one. This is a good example of that. There are actual physical or mental or whatever you want to call it, conditions that would manifest itself like this, similar things. Foaming at falling like a seizure. Well, this was not a normal thing. This was actually a spirit, a demon, that was causing these things to happen to this young man, which he appears to be based on the fact that he said it's been happening to him since childhood. From childhood would imply that he's not a child anymore. So, he comes and he gives the explanation about what this argument was about, or what all the commotion was about. Was he brought this son of his to him, but he wasn't there. He was up on the mountain. So he asked instead, as anybody would, he asked his disciples if they would cast it out, and heal his son. So they tried. But it didn't work. Now, did or did not the disciples, at least the other apostles, have the ability to do this? Yeah, when he sent them out, It explicitly says that's one of the things He gave them was the power or the authority to cast out unclean spirits, as well as healing other illnesses and things. They were given that ability by Jesus, by God, I guess in general you could say. They were given the power to do that. Now we're reading an instance when they failed. They had the ability, the power, they had been given it, but now it wasn't working. It didn't work. And this apparently caused sort of an ordeal. The scribes certainly seized this opportunity to launch what turned into an argument. Now, why would they do that? Why would the scribes be arguing about this? What do you think was their side of the argument or the conflict? Here are the disciples of Jesus. Here's a man with a son that has an unclean spirit. Asked them to cast him out. They tried and they failed. Okay, they're going to seize upon their failure as a negative reflection on their master. Remember, they had challenged Jesus in the past to show them a sign, and He refused. And they're already going to, grab a hold of that and say, look, he won't do it. He's chicken. He can't do it. He won't do it. Now His disciples are trying to do it, and they're unable. So this is like, the heyday for the scribes on this occasion. They are really taking advantage of this, and that is clearly what this commotion and conflict down at the foot of the mountain was all about. The scribes were there arguing with them about this situation. Can't do it. See, we told you these guys were heretics. And now you have all the proof you could ever need. Look, they could not heal this man's son. But the description is pretty vivid and pitiful, to be honest. It's of a totally different nature than the one I mentioned a few minutes ago, with how it seized him and he would break the chains and run out to the caves and cry out and cut himself and hurt himself. This was seemingly a young man, maybe a teenager. And when the Spirit came over him, he was the main victim. When the Spirit came over that other man, he was the victim, but there were other people that you could almost consider more of victims than he was. But in this case, this young man, this man's son, was totally at the mercy of this demon in a totally different way. It would throw him down. He would foam at the mouth. He would grind his teeth, and his body would become stiff. And he says in verse 22 that there have been times in their life, that he was thrown. It happened near a fire, and he fell into the fire. Happened near water. That's terrifying for a father, for a parent. Needless to say, he probably made sure that he wasn't around fire or water very much, after that happened. But the boy's lucky to be alive if this came over him and made him fall into water, assuming that he means, a significant body of water. No wonder he came to Jesus. And now he's more desperate than ever, because he's just witnessed Jesus' disciples try and fail. It may be that if they failed, it may be the case that even Jesus won't be able to do it. But before they even get to that, Jesus expresses his, not sure the word, frustration is the word our lesson is using. It was frustration. Just remember that he sighed deeply in his spirit. It was sort of the same thing going on here, except he actually spoke and he said, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you?" What do you think? Why did he say that? Who's that directed to? Or what's it about?
So it's probably directed toward his disciples.
Mm-hmm. Everybody in a way, but considering what he just said, the faithlessness that was nearest to him at this point was what that man just told him. They tried and they weren't able. And he attributes that to a lack of faith or a faithlessness. But also, it's so many things compiled together. Over and over and over. Faithlessness, he has seen faithlessness manifested in so many different ways every single place he goes. Whether it's the scribes arguing this way, that's faithlessness, isn't it? The disciples being unable to cast out the demon. He may even see a little bit of faithlessness in the young man's father. Already at this point. Maybe it was his demeanor, maybe the way he was expressing this or speaking of it. May have been, with his head hanging low and he was hopeless. But Jesus is, again, it's weighing on him because he is a man. He's human. And even, we might say, even the best, strongest men, spiritually or mentally or emotionally, eventually are going to feel the weight on their shoulders. Well, we see even a perfect man, even the perfect man, that's true of him as well. How long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Nevertheless, what we might expect the next sentence to be is, get out of my sight. Go. I'm done. Yeah, he might change his mind later, but right now he says, go away, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. But that's not what he says, is it? Not even close. He lets this out, and there was probably even some sort of purpose in saying those things. But he says, bring him to me. He's going to do it. But he is a little disappointed maybe that he's having to do it. Not because he doesn't want to, but because the reason he's having to do it is because his disciples couldn't do it. Which says something about them. They let him down. Now, the father, again, they brought the boy to him. When the Spirit saw him, Jesus, that is, it started doing this to the boy, the young man. That word's pretty loose or elastic word, obviously. Just like he described, it comes over him and this is what it does. Sees Jesus, there he goes. He does it. It happens. Immediately, Mark's favorite word, it convulsed the boy. He fell on the ground, rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Said, what was this demon trying to do to this son of his and this child when he was a child as well? According to him, he's doing everything he can to destroy him. or even if he's not trying, intending to do that, that's what he's going to end up doing if something doesn't happen, if this doesn't stop. It's only a matter of time. We managed to save him the other times. The time that he fell into the fire, the time that he fell into the water. But it's only a matter of time before it happens in a way that we can't. We're not so fortunate. And this is where he says what ended up getting him a rebuke. A gentle rebuke, but a rebuke nonetheless. He says, "But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." We can't read this man's mind. We don't know what it was that led him to say that. It may have been the case that he didn't even mean anything by it. He wasn't meaning to imply. We just read on the mountain, remember, Peter said something. He didn't realize what he was saying. He didn't think about or perceive or really process the implication of what he said when he said, "Hey, why don't we make 3 tabernacles for you and Moses and Elijah?" He didn't know what he was saying. That may be true of this man too. What he didn't realize by saying, "if you can do anything," be implying that he's questioning whether Jesus is able to do it. However, like we already pointed out, there is a pretty good chance that he was implying that on purpose because the disciples weren't able. And if the disciples weren't able when they had been given the power to do it, who's to say that for some reason that he can't understand, Jesus wouldn't be able to either? So it was a more or less innocent statement, but Jesus latched onto it, didn't he? Because he said, "if you can." He quoted those words. He caught that and he emphasized it. "If you can." And here's his rebuke, the gentle rebuke. All things are possible. But that's not all of it. For one who does what? One who believes. In other words, you better believe. If you believe, all things are possible. Yeah, Wayne? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Have faith. Because again, it's not about our ability or lack thereof. It's about God. It's not always about God. It depends on what we're doing, But if we're doing God's will, if we do our best effort, put forth our best effort, trusting and knowing and believing that God will help us and is with us, that belief makes all the difference. According to this statement, the implication of Jesus' statement, and other passages of the New Testament, indicates that one of the things that determines whether God will help us is if we believe that He will, and trust that He will, and believe that He can. And so, in the gentlest way He possibly could, it seems to me anyway, Jesus rebukes what this man said and corrects it. All things are possible for one who believes. Now, maybe it's not necessary to point out, but maybe it is. He doesn't mean literally all things. Literally, no matter what it might be. Just like when he said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains, doesn't mean that he literally meant you can move a whole mountain. An actual rocky mountain, you can move it if you have faith to move it. I have faith I can move this mountain, so here I go. No. Well, it doesn't mean literally anything will happen for you if you believe that it will happen for you. But in this case, and in other cases like it, belief is necessary. It can't happen if you don't believe. And so immediately, verse 24, the father of the child cried out and said, I believe. Help my unbelief. It's one of the most profound and beautiful statements ever uttered. And he probably had no idea how profound it was that just came out of his mouth. I believe. Help my unbelief. Sounds like a total nonsense, doesn't it? Well, total contradiction. But it's not. It is, but it's not at the same time. He believed, but he didn't believe near as strongly as he could and should and wanted to. So, just like all of us, we can have belief and unbelief fighting each other at the same time. And I think we almost always do, don't we? Well, I believe that God is powerful, but I don't believe that He's going to do this or can do this or this or this. Or I don't believe that God will work providentially for this or that. I know that He is God, and I believe that He's powerful, but He's not going to, He doesn't do anything today. That's belief and unbelief right there, fighting each other. And you know what? According to this, we learn if that's my mentality, then I'm right. God isn't going to do anything. James talked about that. Ask of God, but when you ask God, you better not doubt, because if you doubt, then you're a double-minded man, and a double-minded man better not expect to get anything from God, because he won't. If you ask anything doubting, then you won't receive whatever you ask. So, here, I believe, help my unbelief. Verse 25 then says, when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, He rebuked the unclean spirit. You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. After crying out and convulsing him terribly, he came out. And after that demon came out, he was like a corpse, the boy was, because, again, he had convulsed him, threw him down on the ground, and maybe, I don't know if he was still lying there, but when Jesus rebuked it, the spirit, whether he came back to himself for a few moments or whether he was lying there, it happened again. And now he's really, maybe more violently than ever, convulsing the boy. And then he left. And once he left this time, the boy was lying there like he was dead. What it looked like to the eye was that this demon succeeded and killed this boy. He's killed him now, just like the father was worried about. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose.
This also made it seem like the father's answer, even though he wasn't where he needed to be, like just the fact that he had the desire within him, Jesus heard him and obviously could tell his heart, so that he wanted to believe more. Just, even if we're not going to be like, the fact, God knows if we're really wanting to get there, it would make like all the difference.
Yeah. paired with the fact that he did have some faith, he had faith enough to bring him to there. And he's confessed, he says, I do believe, but then he also confessed that he was lacking. And it's almost like this could have been, and maybe he intended it to be, another sort of a rephrased request for him to do it. Help my unbelief by doing this. If you will do this, that'll really help my unbelief. But I think it's mainly because Jesus could tell, and he knew that the man did have some faith. He did believe, but what has just happened has left him struggling because the disciples tried and failed. So that would hurt anybody's spirits or faith. Seeing the disciples of Jesus fail, just like a treatment, a medical treatment that doesn't succeed would be, that would just crush you. Because you were so hopeful and you got bad news. That would really, really make you struggle. So maybe he is sort of hinting at, help my unbelief now. Show me. Do this. Help my unbelief. Totally, if that's the case, it's still totally different than, hey, show me a sign so we'll know. Prove it. Because this man is sincere, he's earnest, and he's wanting to believe even more than he does already. And Jesus did it. He answered, or he responded. And he saved that boy, this man's son. However old he was, ever since he was a child, this has been happening to him, and never again. That demon would never enter. Every time that happened was when that spirit entered into him, and he never did it again. A great day for that man, that whole family. But then, the disciples, when they entered the house, whatever house they were staying at, now they're in private, and they wanted to know, how come we couldn't cast it out? Why did we fail? Why did it not work? It's never happened before, obviously. Or else they wouldn't be so shocked and dismayed about it. Why did it not work this time? It worked before. Why didn't it work? Well, Jesus gives them two reasons. The first reason is because of a lack of faith. Now, this is not in Mark's account, but it is in the parallel account. In Matthew 17, he said to them, because of your little faith, just as straight as can be. Why were we not able to cast? Why could we not cast it out? Because of your little faith. Now this is very significant, because modern day faith healers, as they're called, anytime something that they claim to be able to do or that they are going to do doesn't work, they also attribute it to a lack of faith. But whose lack of faith? Yeah. The person's. The other person. Sorry. You didn't have enough faith. Isn't that interesting? Because Jesus doesn't do any such thing as that. He says the reason why you could not cast out that demon was because you didn't have enough faith. Not because he didn't have enough faith. If that was true, this is where Jesus would have answered that way. Oh, don't sweat it. It's not your fault. His fault. He didn't have enough faith. Nothing, you couldn't help that. But he says, you couldn't do it because you didn't have enough faith. So, of course, we know that there is no such thing as faith healers. They're all phonies, and they're all deceiving. They may be deceived, but they're also deceivers. And that's just a cop-out to say, well, sorry, you didn't have enough faith. So one is because of a lack of their faith. They lacked faith. The other was a lack of prayer. Lack of prayer. Now, we know that they went up on that mountain and what happened when they went up on that mountain. But what was the reason why they were going to go up on that mountain? I think one of the accounts says, maybe not. Let me double check. Yeah, it's Luke's account. In Luke 9:28, about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter and James and John and went up on the mountain to pray. So they went up on that mountain to pray. That's when he was transfigured. When he was praying. Well, it seems that down at the bottom of the mountain, there wasn't so much praying going on. And maybe in general, there wasn't so much praying going on. Their prayer life was not in order. So, going back to the faith, I probably shouldn't have moved on to the prayer yet, because the rest of verse 20 is where he says, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. And nothing will be impossible for you. That's an expression, okay? Both of these things. Nothing will be impossible for you. Anybody want to venture and come up with something that would 100% be impossible for them, no matter how much faith they have? Think there's something?
Anything God doesn't want to happen.
Okay, something God doesn't want to happen? Yeah. You can go to heaven even if you do anything you want. Reject Jesus, kill Jesus, go on a murdering spree, you name it, and still go to heaven. That's going to be impossible for them, won't it? Live forever in their current state. That'll be impossible for them. Prevent the destruction of the ultimate destruction of the universe. Impossible. Well, then why did Jesus say nothing will be impossible? And by the way, another thing that would be impossible for them is to tell a mountain to move from here to there, and it will move. This is an expression. We use expressions all the time. And that's what Jesus is doing here. His point is, faith is powerful, and don't ever underestimate it, and you have to have faith. Just a little bit of faith is enough. That's the point. Faith the size of a mustard seed is powerful. It's small, but real. Mustard seed is alive. It has potential. But it is more powerful than we could ever imagine. Faith, even that small. But as our lesson points out, it's not the size of the faith necessarily, it's the focus of the faith. And that may be, and likely was, that where they had gone wrong. But then the prayer, again, a lack of prayer. They needed to depend more on God, apparently. Jesus said, this kind. That's probably the most confusing part of this whole section. What does Jesus mean by this kind? This kind of what? Demon or what? I don't know. That's the difficulty of that verse, is this kind of what? Well, it seems like he means the demon, because they said, why could we not cast it out? But whatever he meant, the last part of it is clear. Prayer is the only thing. Or at the very least, this kind can't be driven out without prayer. Now, Jesus just drove the demon out, didn't he? Did he pray for it to be driven out? No, he told it to go out, and it did. But now he's telling them it can't be driven out by anything but prayer. They could have said, what are you talking about, Lord? We just saw you do it. So, well, obviously he means, as far as you're concerned, there's nothing you could do but pray. And maybe their lack of faith was manifested by lack of prayer and dependence on God. So there are things in life now, today, that we have experienced and we can experience where we can't do anything about it, can we? But we can pray. I think this is why people usually, that has become such a common thing that, there's nothing you can do but pray. Now, a lot of times there are things you can do in addition to pray. But sometimes that's true. It may be rare, but there are some things that can come along where there is nothing we can do but pray. But according to Jesus' statement here, that doesn't mean that prayer is a last resort or that it's not effective. Quite the opposite. Prayer, whether it's the only thing you can do or not, prayer is still one of the most powerful and important things to do. No matter how much you can do along with your prayer, the prayer is an absolutely necessary element.